Hello, hello, hello. This is Dr. Troy.
And I'm Ben-Jamin Toy.
We're broadcasting from the Cohesion Culture headquarters in beautiful Charleston, South Carolina, where even when it rains, the sun still shines.
You're going to hear real-time stories from leaders confessing their most crucial or recent experiences in business.
Learn what their cost them, steps they took to fix it, and how they planned
to not do that one again. All right, cohesive leaders, we are joined today with Davin Salvagno, connection that I've had for a little while on LinkedIn. I love that that connection there. And so welcome to the program.
Great to be here, guys. Thank you so much for having me.
One of the things that we like to start with, as folks have gotten used to, is our connections before content. So we would love to know or hear from you something some others would be, if they were to review you on LinkedIn, what is something that they would be shocked or surprised to learn that you have an interest in, that something you don't post or share about?
Well, this might sound a little common for most people, but I love music and I love food. And so when I need to spend some time just like disconnecting from the world and being fully present, I will sit at our piano in our house, or I'll go into the kitchen and cook something. And I know that this is the podcast, but there's been a lot of things that I've made in the kitchen that haven't turned out great. But there's a couple of things I love to do: sit at the piano and sit in the kitchen and make food.
And so when you sit at the piano, do you play by sound, like an ear, or do you actually follow the notes, or a combination?
No, I play by sound. I don't have the patience to follow the notes. I can read the notes, but and this is actually kind of like a point of contention in our house, because like my wife is classically trained, and I don't have the patience to sit in front of a score of music. So I'll hear it, and then within a few minutes be able to kind of duplicate it. And so that's always been a little bit of a tension point in our home.
That's awesome.
Yeah, well, that's a great talent. My wife was classically trained for piano, but she doesn't play as much anymore because she felt like the joy was taken out of it, being restricted to having to hit the exact notes and being told that you didn't hit the exact note, or you didn't stay on it for the right length of time, or whatever those techniques are that you have with it. It sort of disencouraged her from actually having more fun doing it.
All right, Troy, what is something folks would be shocked to know that you have an interest in, or something?
What they would be shocked to know that I have an interest in, I think it would be that I love watching crime thrillers. So yes, we've talked to other guests who like that, but I love Criminal Minds. Like, it's such a great thing. And Dexter is another one of my, like, it's such an interesting twist. Criminal Minds is your typical Law and Order format, right? But Dexter, oh my gosh, yeah. Dexter is just, and like, here I am, I'm rooting for the serial killer. I don't even know how that happens, but it is crazy.
Criminal Minds, before or after Manny Patinkin?
Well, I've watched the whole series. Okay, so I've seen it all. Yeah.
So for those that don't know, that is the actor who played Inigo Montoya in The Princess Bride. So he getting some acting at the end. Yeah.
Prepared to die.
Something for me is that people are shocked to hear is that I actually love theater. And at one point, when I lived with my uncle in the upstate of South Carolina, we had season tickets, do you call them that, to the Peace Center, and we were there quite regularly. So I love theater and musicals and all those things.
You little thespian.
I don't do the acting. I just appreciate it. I just appreciate the thespians.
Well, I know you guys are the ones asking questions, but now I have to ask, what's your favorite musical?
Well, so here is the craziest thing is, this was not a musical. I'm going to give two ones. One, I really, really enjoyed a Penn and Teller time that they came to the Peace Center in Greenville, South Carolina, because at the time I was in college, and my college professor was a consultant to their Play With Your Food scenario. And my college professor, Dr. Appling, was the world's foremost authority on the glowing pickle. And so because of that, I got to meet them backstage and all that. So that was a fun, but actual theater, My favorite was a version of Fiddler on the Roof that I got to see. It was good, but the funniest thing is the week later, or the week prior, no, the week prior, I saw my high school alma mater do the Fiddler on the Roof, and I enjoyed my high school one better because of so much energy and youthful energy, all that. We were watching a just recently off Broadway version of it, and the guy was tired, and you could tell he was tired. There was no if I were a rich man. It's like if I were a man at this point. Like he was so tired. It just watching a high schooler do it. It had so much energy. It was great. So
what about you? Do you have one?
Les Mis by far is hands down my favorite music of all time. It's so much so that my family, like, they roll their eyes if they even hear a Les Mis song because they're like, "Oh, here goes Davin again. He's going to start singing." But I have a lot of favorite ones, but Les Mis has always been my favorite.
So for me, a long-term memory was watching The Wizard of Oz with my mom and dad, and specifically my mom, and spending that time with her. And Wicked has just become like we have seen it. I can't even tell you how many times, and we've seen it in so many different locations. I think we've seen it in London 4 different times.
It defies gravity for you.
Defies gravity.
Nice.
That's right.
I would say the one that I've watched the most, though, is The Greatest Showman. So I can sing that one time and time again. So, well, all right. So that took a different turn. Great.
Yeah,
it's awesome.
So now let's get
back to your regular scheduled programming.
There we go.
So, Davin, we love to have the guests get to know you as your identity. So we want to know who you are as a person, who you character traits, behaviors, what your friends would say about you, what your enemies would say about you. What is it that makes you you? We're not talking now roles you have, things you've accomplished.
So it's interesting that you actually just said The Greatest Showman, because my wife Amy will constantly, not that I am nearly as good looking or successful as Hugh Jackman, but she will constantly kind of draw that equation to who I am as a person. Because when you think about, if you've seen that movie, and if you're listening to this and you haven't seen the movie, I apologize, but he is enamored with initially early, seeing the gifts, talents, and abilities in other people, and then wanting to bring those to life and shine the spotlight on that. And that's something that pretty much has defined me for probably the last 30 years. I'll be 45 this year. So for the first 15 years, I didn't know that I had that trait, but probably for the last 30, I was enamored with other people's abilities, and wanting to amplify that. And so, but then, and we'll probably get to these stories later in the podcast, but there was a couple series of wrong turns where got distracted and sometimes wasn't always focused on that and made it about other things that turned into uh-oh moments, which we'll talk about later. But a couple correlations to Hugh Jackman that I would just share that I love music. So, I feel like there's constantly a score playing in life at all periods of time. Like it's never silent, right? And so I'm always listening to the music in life and how it's playing. It has a deep meaning for me. I love people. I genuinely love people. So much so that probably to a detriment, again, probably to some uh-oh stories that we could share later. But I always try to see the best in people, not as they are, but as they can be. And sometimes that's gotten me in trouble in the past because I am ultimately a believer in the potential of people. The other thing, people would say that I'm an extrovert. I'm loud. I enter a room. I'm 100% Italian. I talk with my hands. I'm from East Coast Philly, so I could be obnoxious. But the reality is, I also enjoy some alone time, which is weird. You don't see that in a lot of extrovert people, but there's some times where I just kind of want to like disconnect and just settle into the music and recharge. And I probably don't get enough of that. So love people, love music, love amplifying others, big personality when I'm in the room, but also enjoy just retreating sometimes and settling into the music.
That says so much about you because it's one of the fundamentals of the transformative leadership, which is the basis of cohesion culture. And that is that the leader focuses on the needs of others first before self.
That's
So
right.
in the same way, like you're focusing on the talents of others before self, not that you're giving way, it's not a martyrism, you're not forgetting about self, it's just where your focus and intention is. I also find it interesting that you talked about Hugh Jackman here, and then, we just referenced Les Mis as one of yours. And so I'm sure you probably had some affiliation or seeing him in the 2012 version where he sang. And it's funny, but every time I see him, I don't really care what role he is. I'm expecting him to be Wolverine. I'm just expecting Wolverine to come out,
and that's not his passion. Like, that's the crazy part.
Right. That was probably the least Wolverine movie he was ever in, right? But he did a fantastic job of that. And just a quick note, I have to say on that movie, one of the most brilliant scriptings ever. It had one of the most brilliant and worst scriptings of all time. The worst was, Russell Crowe as Javert was probably not a great idea, but having the original Valjean play the bishop in that movie and bookending that story of grace was just absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, super. So we brought cultural value to the people who were listening
Absolutely.
today too. So well, that has upped our game a little bit, because normally, thank goodness you're here, because it wouldn't have been that.
So my thought is, when you seeing the abilities and things of others, how did you access that? Was that interviews? Was that promoting? Was that Napoleon Hill style, right? Where he learned, Andrew Carnegie sent him on the task. He got to interview folks, and then he applied things later to his own life. What type of results or process for the last 30 years have you applied to yourself with that skill set?
So I think the seed may have been planted from reading some early Dale Carnegie and Napoleon Hill work back in the early 2000s. But really where it started was when someone saw something within me that I didn't see within myself, and then drew that out. And when they did, it changed the entire trajectory of my career. And what I realized was I wanted to do that for other people. And the reason why, just to kind of pull you back a little bit, I went to school to be a teacher. I wanted to be a teacher. I never became a teacher in the traditional sense. I have taught a couple elective courses for high school classes in business and entrepreneurship and different things of that, but I never became a full-time teacher. And I was working at Costco as a marketing manager back in 2001, and I met Jim Sinegal, the founder and CEO of Costco. And I was a walking, talking billboard for Costco. I loved everything about them, their values, what they stood for, how they treated their people. And Jim had walked into our warehouse one day, and he came up to me and he put his hand out and he said, "Hi, I'm Jim. What's your name?" And I said, "I'm Davin." And I knew his name was Jim. Everybody knew who Jim was. And he knew my name was Davin because I had a name badge on that said Davin. But he wanted to make that human connection with me. And one of the things that people had shared with him was that I had this innate ability to teach people what Costco was all about as the marketing manager. There was this gift that I had to teach others. And so we got into a conversation. He said, "Davin, why do you work at Costco? Well, what is it we're doing well? What is it we could be doing better?" And I'm thinking, why are you asking me? Shouldn't you be asking the general manager? Why are you asking the marketing guy? And then he asked me this question, which changed my life. He said, "Davin, what are your goals and dreams? And by working at Costco, are we going to help you fulfill those?" And that question sent me sideways, because I'm thinking, why do you care whether or not your company is going to fulfill my goals and dreams? And so I was so curious as to why he took an active interest in me. And I've shared that story before, but what I've never shared before on any podcast is probably what I'm realizing now in your question is afterwards, I started like telling everyone, "You won't believe the conversation I just had with Jim." And there was a couple people that I worked for at that time. They said, "Well, the reason why, Davin, is because you just have a genuine love for people and for what Costco is all about. And you want other people to benefit from what we're all about. And you share that organically with other people." And I didn't realize that I did that. So it took other people seeing natural innate abilities within me and bringing that to life that made me all of a sudden think, "Oh my gosh, I have value here. I matter here. I'm not just a marketing guy. There's something within me that I contribute, that I bring to the table." And as a result of that, my self-esteem went up, and there was a value set that went up. And I thought, I want to give everybody else the same feeling that I'm feeling right now. So I think it was subconscious early on. And then I read some of those works. But I think what would happen is I would organically, in different roles and positions, start to just kind of ask myself, what's this person's good at? What's this person's superpower? What makes them unique? And just try to speak that back into them so that they knew that they were value and that they had purpose and that they contributed to something, to help them feel the same way that I felt from that interaction with Jim.
You just experienced the cohesion phenomenon, is what you just explained. So it's three strategic elements or three areas of focus. It's the sense of belonging that has to have inclusion to make it come full circle. Value, which is your meaningful work or the purpose. And we know that you speak a lot on purpose. And then lastly, it's the mutual commitment, which typically shows up in collaboration of these desired mutual outcomes that relate not only for the organization, but for you, the individual. And oftentimes that happens through collaboration where both need and trust are very present and very, dominant in the conversation. So you really got that sense through that questioning. And those questions were all designed for self-discovery. He was really helping you self-discover something within you. And so if organizational leaders could do more of that, it would be amazing what they could do for their employees. Most of the individuals who are listening to this podcast have found themselves at some point in time either discouraged or disappointed or unsatisfied with their current employer because they're not getting the training and development that they need. They're also being passed over for promotion and they have no plan for success. So you participating in this podcast today is helping to elevate that. And just the richness of the information that we have captured in the first 16 minutes of this podcast is worthy for people to go back and listen to again and to hear what it is to bring forth those talents. And you may not have somebody, you may not be fortunate like you or Ben or myself who had mentors who poured into us. You may be an individual who does it. I'm saying you can also mentor yourself. Look yourself in the mirror and ask yourself, what is it that I do that is unique? What is it that I can contribute? How can I build up what is happening here without having someone else do it? Ben is excellent at reminding people that they do not need permission from anyone to grow, develop, and advance. And that's the same thing that happens. We shouldn't have to sit back and wait for someone to tell us. It's nice when they do, but if not, we can actually get to that point of self-motivation, which is one of the 5 areas of emotional intelligence that sometimes gets left out. And that is our internal motivation. And how do we motivate ourselves to accomplish and do things and not always wait on someone external to do it for us?
So good.
It's a good start already.
We had a little cohesion church there.
There we go.
Little cohesion church.
All right. So that was a lot of good stuff that we just had. Now we're going to transition into what is the experience that you are prepared to share about.
Well, I have to say this is hard because there's so many of them. And I wanted to see the direction that we would go in our conversation. So I had like 3 or 4 of them teed up. But there's one specifically I'm going to share because there's an piece to it, but then there's also a redemption piece to it that if we get to the redemption piece, I think will be beautiful. But I'll start with the piece. I shared earlier that I love people and I aim to see not them as they are, but as they can be. One of my favorite quotes that I read very early on, back actually in my Costco years, in a book called The Encore Effect. The quote I read was that managers see people as they are, leaders see people as they can be. And so I always tried to see people as who they can be and try to bridge the gap from where they are to where they can be. So back in about 2010, 2011, so we're talking 13, 14 years ago, I ran a whole bunch of stores for CVS Health. And we would have what were called market visits, where the CEO of the company would fly in and go tour, like 10 or 12 stores and make sure he would not do what Jim Sinegal did, which was run around and ask people, what are we doing well? What are we doing better? What are your goals and dreams? And are we going to help you accomplish them? It was much more operationally focused, much more execution focused. Do the stores look the way that they do? Do they have the product that they have? Are the signs right? Are the stores clean? And so what would happen is there would always be this massive amount of effort before a tour or a market visit to make sure that the stores that the CEO was going to go to look better than they did on opening day 10 years ago, which was not reality. They never looked how they were like. It was a complete smoke and mirrors thing, right? And I had a person who reported to me that was in charge of a specific area of stores. And I had a family commitment the weekend before this tour visit. The tour was happening Monday morning. And I entrusted that the stores that he was overseeing were going to look the way that they needed to look for the market visit. And one of the caveats of this was my brand new boss, which was the regional director, had just gotten placed in the area. We hadn't even met yet. And she was going to be on this tour. So the executive airport that you fly into Detroit, where I was at the time, was right across the street from one of these stores. So there was no way the store was not going to get visited. 100%. This store was getting visited because you pulled out of the airport and it was right there. So we had poured all of our resources into making sure that the store is right. And I was on the phone with this particular employee of mine Friday night, Saturday night. Are you sure it's right? We're going to be good. Everything's great. I could trust you, right? And Ronald Reagan's famous words were trust but verify. And seeing his potential and knowing his heart, there was a piece of me that said I probably should go down there Saturday and see it for myself. And I didn't. I chose to entrust the leader that I'd put in charge of this area that it was going to be fine. And so then I went down there Monday morning, having not been there since the previous Friday. And I'm walking up to the parking lot, and my brand new regional director standing outside the store with her arms crossed. Never even met her. And I walk up and she says, "You must be Davin." And I said, "I am." She goes, "Well, I hope the rest of the stores that we're going to see today don't look like this one." And she walks into her car and she leaves. And that's the first I'm thinking I'm going to be fired right here, right now, because I delegated this. I didn't trust and verify. I believed way too much in this person's capabilities. I was trying to make them and it wasn't me being lazy and not wanting to go down there. I really was trying not to micromanage this person, because the backstory there was I was actually brought in from outside the company into this role. And this person wanted the role that I was in and had been with the company for 20 years. And there was a little bit of resentment that they brought me in from another company and that he didn't get this promotion. So I really thought if I made him the hero and set him up for success, gave him all the resources he needed, and made this look great for what was going to be my new boss, I could say, actually, well, it wasn't my doing, it was his, and set him up for success. And so while my intentions were pure, it completely backfired. And we did not get off to the best start. For the next 2 years, I had to dig myself out of that hole. But the moment that I had was walking up to that store, realizing, oh man, I should have came down here this weekend, and I didn't. And I just probably tanked not only my career, but his career. And it took at least 2 years to dig out of that.
So, there are so many things to unpack in that before we get to some of the other follow-up questions, but just to go back and think about that. So, as a leader, your motivations and intentions were very well directed toward an individual having an opportunity to show what they were capable of doing. And so you could think back and say, well, I could have gone on Saturday again. Well, first of all, you can't go back and do things you didn't do. So you can forget about thinking about that. But the reality is this was a 20-year veteran. This was an individual who was wanting to aspire to another position. And I think it's a reasonable expectation that a person will follow through. And if you're having conversations with them on a regular basis, you're just not visiting it to like you said, verify, what you trusted to be true. I don't think that falls back on you. I think it falls back more on the individual. And having a leader who will give you the space to make a mistake is good, but you just have to be careful when you make those mistakes. And then, some of what you said already leading into like, what did it cost you? So let's talk about that. So you had this experience, didn't go as very well, arms crossed, making what I would call my sitcom comment before I drove away, right? There would have been a laugh track on it had it have been The Office or some other favorite TV show, when the person says, well, I hope the other stores will look better than this one. That would have been a laugh track, and then it would have been funny and life would have gone on. So what did this cost you? I know you hinted at it a little bit. but what did it cost you in terms of reputation, of money, resources, whatever? What did it cost you?
Yeah. So first impressions are a very, very big thing, especially in retail. And again, I mentioned this was my first impression with my brand new boss. And one of the things that was cultural at that time that we were doing was called a 9-box assessment, where you everyone in every position, right? I was in a district director role at the time. She was a regional director role. And then you've got area directors and all such and everything, but everyone would do what's called a 9-box assessment, where you literally place people on a box based off of their competency and commitment. And that honestly, there should be some really good due diligence before you place anyone in a box based off of competency and commitment. That was another learning moment for me from that experience. But I knew that out of the 9-box, the way that it's set up is that you've got the 1 box, which is these are the people that they're not competent and they're not committed and are what they call the manage out box, right? And then you've got your 2 and 3 boxes, and those boxes are people that are like, okay, well, they're committed, but their competence has a ceiling. Like they're never going to be more than just a strong performer for you, maybe, but they're not promotable. They're never going to go up to the next level from where they're at right now. And then you've got like 4, 5, and 6 boxes, which is like development territory. It's like, okay, here's where we got variable commitment and competency. And based, if they get the right leadership and the right resources, there's a lot of potential here. And then you've got like your top tier, which is 7, 8, and 9. And these are people that are already performing well, but they're massively underutilized and they've got so much potential about them. And that's where you really want to give your resources. Well, the previous market director that had hired me had brought me in at like an 8 or a 9. I don't think it was a 9, maybe an 8 on the 9-box. Like, this is going to be my guy, right? Unfortunately, 2 years into our relationship, he was let go for different things. Nothing out of integrity, but just whole other story for another time. Great guy. And she replaced him. And she wanted to make her mark on it, right? So now I've got 2 things working against me. One, I'm her predecessor's hire. and the person that is supposed to be like the future of the organization. And she's coming in looking to make a name for herself. And the very first store that she goes to is nowhere near expectation. And so she's going to make a 9-box right after this, right? And I'm pretty sure that I was very quickly placed into that 1-box right after that visit, right? So going from an 8 to a 1 is not a great thing. That's where people get put on pips and all those different things off of just one experience. Now, again, there's a redemption story that if we get time to, we can share too. But what I knew that I had to do was I had to spend I didn't know it was going to take 2 years, but I needed to spend the next 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year, however long it was going to take, to convince this person that my commitment was high, and not from a boastful standpoint, but my competency was high, and that I was a lifelong learner, that I had a growth mindset and not a fixed mindset. And I was willing to learn and do whatever I need to do to continue to grow as a leader. And I'm not sure that was the initial perception. So it took a lot of time first. So there was a reputation hit, and then there was a lot of time piece. But then you mentioned the financial piece of that. This was also right before performance reviews and bonus comp. And I could tell you that my performance review and my bonus comp was nowhere near what it should have been that year because of just this one experience. So you're talking tens of thousands of dollars that year that were lost. You're talking a reputation and emotional hit, and a potentially a whole career pathing hit. There was probably in that time frame maybe 2 or 3 promotions that I wouldn't even be considered for, that under the previous leader I would have been considered for had this experience not happened. So all was righted later, but that was a very hard, challenging 2 years to dig out of.
So on as you're explaining this, one thing I did not hear is passing the buck, right? Especially to your boss, right? You never did that. During the situation, did you ever try to justify? Did you ever explain? How did those conversations go, or the conversation that you had with the 20-year veteran? Like, I'd love for people to hear that too, on how that conversation up and down went.
So and I wish I would have had this verbiage earlier. I didn't learn this until probably about 5 years ago, but one of my dear friends now, Gary Ridge, who's the former CEO of WD-40 Company, He has a great concept that we don't have failures, we have learning moments. Everything is a learning moment. Nothing is a failure. But the reason that spoke to me so much is one of the quotes that I had heard back then. Failure is not final or fatal. It's the courage that to continue to move on that counts. And one of the other things that I had learned from a previous company before coming to CVS was this concept of the accountability ladder. And one of the things that I learned very, very early on was to not blame others, not make excuses, to own it, learn what it is that I could have done differently, make those corrections, and move on. And so if you look at the accountability ladder, there's those that blame others, make excuses, and actually you lose power, credibility as a leader when you do that. But when you start from a position of curious and you ask yourself, okay, well, let me first own this. This was I had a piece in this. What could have I done differently? What learning moments do I have here? And then you make those adjustments and you move on. You actually gain power and credibility as a leader. And I learned that coming into this. And so the first thing was to apply that to myself, right? So you had mentioned not blame her. I could have easily have said, oh, new, girl in a position of power trying to make a statement. I didn't do any of that, right? That's what other people may have said. I looked at this and said, okay, what could I have done differently to made sure that the right thing happened here, that she got the right impression rather than the wrong impression. I own this. This has nothing to do with her circumstances or the person who I delegated it to. So then once I do that for myself, it's the same thing for the person I delegate to. Rather than blaming that person, let's have that conversation. And I did, and I sat down with him and I said, let's talk about what happened here and what we could have done differently. And fortunately, because I've been working with him for a little bit, he owned it too. He didn't blame me. He didn't say, well, you didn't give me the resources I need. You didn't come down here. You left me hanging. You wanted me to look bad because, you knew I wanted your job. Like none of that conversation happened. Like I'm in my mind, I'm thinking of like all of the typical stereotypical, chatter that could have happened around this situation. None of that happened. I had a self-accountability conversation with my new boss, and the person who I delegated to had a self-accountability conversation with me. And one of my favorite reframings of accountability, if you will, we use this phrase, you got to hold others accountable. I can't stand that phrase. And the reason why is because if you look up accountability in the dictionary, the real meaning of that word is you can count on me. If I say I'm going to be accountable, it's like me raising my hand, say, I got this. You can count on me. That's what accountability is. Accountability, you can't hold anyone accountable. They have to hold themselves accountable. You could put punitive measures in place that force them to do that. But at the end of the day, they could choose not to follow that and accept the consequences. They got to hold themselves accountable. So what was beautiful about this was I was holding myself accountable. He was holding himself accountable. There was no blaming. There was no excuses. And as a result of that, we were both able to learn and grow from that. And actually, we formed a fantastic friendship and I keep teasing to the redemption story, that had that not been handled correctly, I don't think the redemption story would have ever happened.
Well, let's get into that. I want to hear what you've done to not allow that type of situation to happen again. All right, in the trust but verify, what did you learn in your career? And then let's talk redemption.
So we have these things called crucible moments. Nick Craig, who's a dear friend of mine, he wrote the book called Leading from Purpose. And he and I spend a lot of time together. And he's got this concept of looking at crucible moments in your life that are these defining moments that shape who you are as a person. They also shape your decision-making going forward. This was one of those crucible moments for me as a leader, because what that taught me to do from that point forward is that no matter how much I believed in someone's capabilities, no matter how much I want to delegate to them, for this particular moment, going forward, anytime that situation came up again, where I was delegating something this big to someone, I would make sure that, I followed up and actually verified what I was trusting them with. But I would preface it not with hey, I'm not showing up because I don't trust you or because I'm trying to micromanage or any of those things. I want to make sure that you're set up for success. And part of that is just being a second set of eyes and being able to make sure that you're set for success. So I never allowed that situation, particularly in that career, to happen again. That was kind of an isolated incident. But the redemption story behind this, and this is something that I think is a beautiful thing, because what I just shared with you earlier was that depending on how that situation was handled, determined the future career path, not just for myself, but for the person that I was developing. This person, I continued to entrust them with more things, right? I didn't go back and say, oh, you left me hanging out to dry, you dropped the ball and didn't give them responsibility again, right? No, I gave them more. I entrusted them with more because I still believed in their capability. I just supported them better as a leader. And as I mentioned earlier, I verified and actually made sure I was a second set of eyes, not in a way that micromanaged, but in a way just make sure that they didn't miss anything from a supportive standpoint. And we had two-way dialogue around this the entire time, so that there was never a preconceived notion that like, well, I trust you, but I'm just making sure, right? It's like telling your kids, like my son, for example, this is, I'll come back to that story for a second. My son, we've been working on combing his hair. His name's Bennett, and he's 10 years old. And for the last 2 years, I used to comb his hair and get him ready for school, actually for a lot longer than 2 years. But specifically for the last 2 years, I've been combing his hair, and he's been telling me, Dad, I got it. I got it. But I would continue combing his hair. And then eventually he's like, Dad, I got it. So he started to do it, but I would literally stand over his shoulder and be like, no, buddy, you got to start with your part here. No, you got to, I was literally micromanaging him while he was trying to comb his hair. And then I realized what I was doing, and I pulled off, and I would just sit in the bathroom and watch him. And even though I wasn't jumping in, I was still kind of micromanaging him because I was still looking over his shoulder, right? And he just kept on saying, Dad, I got it. And at some point, I'm like, you know what? I just need to not even go upstairs and just trust him to go do his hair and then come down. And I was thinking about, he'll never learn to do it himself or have the confidence that he can do it himself as long as I'm looking over his shoulder. And so at one point I had a conversation with him, and I said, Bennett, listen, hey, I'm going to give you the chance to do your hair. I'm going to step away. But when you come out, can I have a second look at it just to make sure that you didn't miss anything? And he said, yeah. And then he started to actually come out of the bathroom, and he would say, hey, Dad, what do you think? Right. And he would, so because we had that communication, I didn't just completely walk away. I had the communication say, hey, I'm going to pull off, but there's still going to be this moment where I'm going to verify to make sure it looks good. But rather than me forcing that, he started to ask for it. And so the same thing started to happen with this person back at CVS. Was as I started to pull away, this specific person would actually call me and say, hey, can you come by and take a look at this? Hey, can you take a second look at this? Make sure I didn't miss anything. I empowered them to actually ask for the verification rather than just abandoning them as a leader. And as a result, this person not only developed, but after I left CVS, this person actually got the promotion that they should have got. Not only did they get the promotion that they should have got and got my job, they eventually actually got my boss's job, right? The person who initially, thought that this person had absolutely no potential whatsoever. So as a result of not giving up on this person, continuing to give them the right level of support, continuing to coach them, mentor them, and then empower them to ask for the verification, they continue to learn, they continue to grow. They eventually got to the role that they had wanted several years prior, and then actually got promoted above that into the very role that thought that they didn't even have the potential in the first place.
Got to ask, was it the reason that the performance of the location view or cleanup was different, or for the visit, was it ambiguous expectations, mixed match? Like, where was the disconnect in what was delivered and what you expected?
So I think, have you ever watched like any of these cake baking shows? So like, so like last night, my wife and I were sitting on the couch and we were watching, I think it's actually called Baking It. And it's like with Amy Poehler and Maya Rudolph. And, they have all these cakes and they're making these duplication cakes. And at some point, this one person, they know they're out of time. They know that there's no way that the cake is going to bake and cool to the temperature it needs to cool before they put the icing on it so that the icing doesn't drip off and the cake doesn't sag. Like, the math is the math. And there's a point in the show where they knew that. And of course, you weren't surprised when the outcome happened, right? They tried to force it. They tried to cover it up with frosting and make it look good. But it still drooped. It still leaned. It still, no matter what they tried to do, they just ran out of time and there was no way to cover it up. This was the same exact situation. There was only so much that could be done between Friday and Monday with what they had. And there was no amount of, frosting that we were going to put on this visit to not make it a sagging cake or drooping cake.
Gotcha.
And so the reality is that whether I showed up on Saturday or not wouldn't have made a difference. What needed to happen actually was 2 weeks prior. There was a lot of things that should have happened 2 weeks prior to make sure that that weekend, that location had everything it needed in order to be set up correctly. So there was nothing that, if you would have just looked back at those 3 days, we could have adjusted or fixed. Me showing up on that Saturday would have been of zero impact whatsoever. But it was a good lesson that there was a lot of preparation that should have happened a long time prior.
I just have to tell you, this has been such an action-packed, like these last 20 some minutes that we just had. I mean, there's like a part 2 to this. Like, there are things that I want to do to wrap up for this particular session that we had with you, that is just making sure that people don't skip over this, that they really hone in on it. Because, I mean, you've said some very powerful things to people who are looking to grow, develop, and advance. And some of them equate back to some of the choices or some of the teachings that I learned early on in my life. My mom was very influential in leadership development. High school education, stay-at-home mom. She was the nurturer and the caregiver. My dad was the protector and provider, and just learned so much from her. And things that you talked about with choices. She would tell me that my character would always be defined by the choices I made, not the circumstances I found myself in. And what you demonstrated in that meeting with your new boss, the character that you built in the choice that you made to stand accountable for what you did or did not do, spoke volumes to who you were later on. And although you may have felt that it may have taken you a couple of years to repair that, it could have even been so much longer, or there may not have even been a repair had you have done something different, if you had looked at the circumstances. And I think that speaks to your volume of self-confidence. And for individuals who want to demonstrate self-confidence, they have to make choices that define their character. What are the values that they're going to stand up for when the day is gone? Will they be able to put their head on their pillows at night and take a good night's rest because they know that what they did during that day really mattered? You talked about successes and failures. It wasn't the success of having a great kickoff meeting, or it wasn't the failure, but it's actually how you handle them that makes a difference. It's not the event itself. It's what comes in the aftermath of the event that really determines whether or not you might be more arrogant or you might be more self-confident, depending upon which way you take it. Do you let the humility button go, or do you continue to drive humility? And then the whole thing with your son, oh my gosh, it's a master class in something that we refer to as delegate to teach. And each of the letters TEACH means something. And the only one that I can focus on right now for clarity is the C, which is the communication loop. And this is so important because eventually you get to a point, or in that delegate to teach, you set up a thing where you said, look, let me just verify this. Let me take a second look before we go downstairs or before you go out of the house. That is setting up a communication loop that does not make it sound like you are micromanaging. When you put that communication loop in the very beginning, even if you're going to observe, you put that into the process. I'm not feeling upset about it. It's when you don't do that and you hang around, or you then provide instruction over my shoulder, is when I feel that you're micromanaging. So you being a leader who provides good instruction and is helpful, no, there's not a problem with that. It's just that you have to build that into the communication loop. Otherwise, I think, why in the world are you looking over my shoulder? Do you not have any faith in me? What is the deal? So, oh my gosh, masterclass and things that you demonstrated already in the last 40 minutes. Ben, I'm blown away.
Well, I feel we could go on forever, and I think as a relationship, we're going to be chatting a lot. You know, books and topics and lessons. Can you remind me the quote about was it managers see people as they are and leaders see how they could be? Is that what,
managers see people as they are, leaders see them as they can be.
okay? I love that because it's inspired by one of my absolute favorite Johann Wolfgang von Goethe quotes, which is the full version of when you treat a man as he is, we make him worse than he is. When we treat him as if he was already what he potentially could be, we make him what he should be. And so I love the simplified version of what you said, and I love how it also differentiates managers versus leaders.
Absolutely.
But I love the visualization of also, as if we see him that way, people rise to the level of expectation sometimes. And so, you know, I love the full version, but I love the really simplified version. Because we also want to say that a leader is not a manager, right? So, and that's a great simplification, which I really love.
And I geeked out over the 9-box model. You have to know that I use that in my consulting services with clients when we are attempting to go through a 3-phase process to really assess those individuals who fall under the executive team or that first level of leadership, to really have that, and then to calibrate it by having all of the individuals look at the whole organization and calibrate, is the evaluation been fair from one individual to the next? Oh my gosh,
Yeah,
just really super duper stuff here. So, all right. So we want to end with at least one thing, and that is, how can people contact you? And what's the name of that famous book that you wrote?
Well, I live on LinkedIn, so feel free to follow, connect with me on LinkedIn. I don't have someone manage it. I manage it myself, and I'm glad to have a conversation with you. So reach out. And the book that you're referencing, the newest book, is called Thieves of Purpose. That book came out this year and is now a best-selling book. That's available wherever books are sold. The first book was Finding Purpose at Work. It's how you find purpose in your work. This book is about what gets in the way. What are the 12 things that are robbing you of stepping into the fullness of your purpose and your potential every day, both personally and professionally?
Thank you so much
awesome
for being with us. I mean, seriously, thank you.
Oh,
Well, as we close up all of our Cohesion Culture programs, is with one simple mantra: you don't have to know everything.
You just need to be teachable.